Hello, my name's Mike Ivat, and in this podcast I'm going to be talking to Tassos Stassopoulos about the importance of traditions and faith in the fast-changing societies of emerging markets. Many countries have undergone huge transformations in less than a generation, changing society and throwing up new trends. So Tassos, what's been driving this change?
Well, actually, change itself is probably what's driven it. If you think back, the changes that took the developed market generations is happening for them for years. So if you speak to consumers on the ground, what you're finding is that this causes them a lot of anxiety. They want to embrace technology. They want to be on Facebook and Instagram. They want to have a smartphone, but they don't want to give away their cultural roots and their heritage. Now, I don't know if the following the path of the developed world or shaping this own path and moving back to more collective societies and more conservative societies would be worse. But I can tell you it's definitely a more inclusive path. What they're doing when you speak to consumers, for example, in Indonesia, they're looking for insurance for their parents as opposed to leaving them behind in the villages. They're looking for trips for the whole family. They want the symbols of progress, but they also want more simplicity and authenticity in their lives. Now, this is creating a demand for natural products at a much earlier stage that we're used to seeing it in other countries. And this is putting enormous pressure at multinationals. The multinational knows how to sell you a very expensive natural product when you're rich enough. But when you are at a lower stage of development, a lower stage of GDP, how can you get this done? And so what you're seeing is local brands that are coming and leveraging either the nationalistic or religious pride. And these brands have a clear philosophy and cultural values, and coming in, producing these products, aligning together with consumers on their values. And this is allowing them to create new trends that we haven't seen in the developed world.
So in emerging markets, they have unique cultures, but they also have faith to a greater degree, maybe, than we do here in the Western world. How does faith impact upon emerging markets and on the brands that are working there?
So what you're seeing in places like Indonesia is the rise of Islamic influence. And what you see is products like halal cosmetics. And when we heard about it on the last ethnographic study last May, we thought, okay, this will be a product that is just for the very religious. So all of a sudden you have something that is halal, it means it's permissible, and they can also use cosmetics. But what we were shocked was when consumers were opening their bags that were not religious, they still had those halal cosmetics. And what we understood was that there is a very clear values message coming from this brand, which is about health, quality and safety. And that's what consumers connected with it, and that drove them to do this purchase. So although there is a religious underpinning into this brand, what you actually have is that other people who believe in this brand and they're connecting with it because of its values.
Is faith purely about religion, or does that have a wider implication?
What we're talking about here is about brands that have a faith-like following. And for the brands to achieve that, they need to have very clear values and a cultural underpinning that they communicate to their consumers. If you take the case of Patanjali in India, that is a clear faith brand. Their message on their values is very clear. It's all about simplicity. It's about simple living and high thinking. It's about honesty. It's about integrity. It's authenticity. It is about not allowing big multinationals to take advantage of Indian consumers. So what they're doing is they're selling you an equivalent product at 15 to 30% less price. But what they're also doing is they're taking their profits and plowing it back into Indian local communities by investing in education, in programs for the farmers. So what you can see is people who are connecting with this brand have a very strong affinity to it. I remember I was on a trip to Australia recently, and the Uber driver was from India, and I started talking to him about Patanjali, and he buys Patanjali in Australia, and I said, why? And he said to me, you don't know about integrity in the product. Other people when it comes to chili powder, they put through a grinding machine bricks, and they mix it in the chili and they sell it to you, and you're eating it and you don't know even what you're eating. At least with Patanjali, you know that the product is pure and they haven't adulterated it in any way. So what you can see is people who are coming and have a strong belief and affinity, even if they are miles away from the country.
So Tassos, what do brands have to do? What do they need to do to adapt?
What brands are having to do is stop focusing on purely people's goals and focus also on connecting with people on their values. When I started looking at consumer companies 25 years ago, I was told this amazing secret that apparently every consumer has a goal to make their clothes whiter, their dishes more sparkly, or get a closer shave, and that you could always sell on promises to meet those goals. But what we're finding over the last decade is that people would rather buy a detergent that won't damage the environment when their white is white enough. So what you're seeing is that the multinationals that used to protect these brands that they have with unmatched media spending, is they can no longer do it, because niche brands have tried not only to connect on our material needs, but try to align with our values. So these brands are talking to us emotionally. We're on the same journey. We're growing together. We're learning together. And once this connection happens, these niche brands are in an unassailable position, even if the big guys come and do advertising or discounting. The Uber driver in Australia is not going to dump Patanjali brand because all of a sudden some brand is starting to give him the product at a lower price. And you can see it in the developed world. If you look at Tesla, the customers might say, I believe in Tesla, I'm forward thinking, I care about the world, I am the future. And by the way, my car can beat every petrol health car around. And think now, if you are any automotive manufacturer and you want to take this Tesla customer away from them, it's going to be almost impossible. Sometimes I find it fascinating to listen to discussions about Elon Musk, because people are defending him as if he is a relative of theirs, and that's because they have made this emotional connection with the way of living that his company has prescribed, which align values.
This increase in pride and confidence that's happening in emerging markets, it's not nationalism though, is it? There's something deeper going on here.
Yes, what you're seeing, Mike, is not a step backwards into them being more conservative societies, but actually what you're seeing is these people anchoring on what is good about their culture and then moving forward. It's not about going back to the village. It's not about women losing their rights and being locked at home, but actually moving to a more inclusive society and using the good aspects of your culture to move forward.
And who's leading the way on this? Who's guiding people down this path?
Well, pop culture is a huge factor in this, and the evolution of local content in media is having an enormous effect. I remember we did a trip through India. We visited a very backward stage, the second poorest state in India, Uttar Pradesh, and went to one of the richest states, Telangana, to understand about women empowerment. And I remember asking parents about educating their daughters. And one of the problems they had, they were saying, well, I cannot send my daughter to get a master's degree, because if she gets a master's degree, she will expect her husband to have a master's degree. And if that's the case, it's going to cost me not only her education, but even a higher dowry. And then she gets married, she will leave and go to live with his parents, and we will be left with all these debts. Dowries were banned in India in 1961, and people are still giving dowries today. Now, move fast forward to probably 2 years ago, we started picking in India a huge change that was driven by just a simple movie, a movie called Dangal, which was a huge blockbuster, but it had a very simple message. It's a story of a wrestler that is living his dreams through his daughter, who is turning into a wrestler. And that was a very simple message. But actually, when you're doing ethnographic studies on the ground, you're finding people that are telling you the story that, well, I can have my dreams through my daughters. And the daughters are saying the message that no matter what my husband tells me, I will not leave them, my parents, when I marry. And therefore, this is reinforcing the message, and you're seeing the parents more willing to educate their daughters because now they believe they can live their dreams through their daughters as well as their sons.
What excites you about what you're doing?
I love working on emerging markets. Emerging markets are places of opportunity and hope and change that's continuously happening. And I believe to be able to capture that, you need to have two things. You need to be both analytical and insightful. And what I'm saying is very different from what I would have said to you 10 years ago. I didn't think that insight mattered for anything. I believed in pure rational analysis. And everything we do in the financial world is all about taking numbers, looking at numbers, analyzing, and having a very strict, repeatable process. And that works very well in static environments. But what I came to the realization 10 years ago is that actually to understand emerging markets, you need to also have an insightful process that helps you understand and predict the trends. And that is actually very hard work of getting on the road, spending time with people, trying to understand their lives. And with that, you will get insights. But insights is not like doing fundamental analysis. Fundamental analysis, you can say to me when I'm looking at a specific company, when will you finish your analysis? And I will say to you, Mike, I will finish in 3 days' time at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and my work will be done and I will be able to present it. But the work we are talking about, themes like what empowers women or branded faith, then you think, I know the trend. And then I can follow the normal analytical path that I've done for the last 28 years of my life. The tough part is being insightful at the same time as being analytical. And if you looked at it, I actually didn't have a differentiated strategy for the long term. All I was trying to do was I was trying to outsmart everybody by doing exactly the same work that everybody else does, but just looking at the same data with a bit more detail. Now, I believe that you could still make money out of the long term. So I felt that I had to find a way to retrain myself to look beyond numbers.
How did you come about finding your insights?
Over the last decade, I've been on a journey. I've designed a process specifically aligned to this core investment belief that there is alpha to be generated from investing with a long-term horizon. One that aims to anticipate trends by understanding people's values and how those are evolving. Now, this journey has taken me to the homes in villages and towns across emerging markets, from the slums of Lagos to middle-class homes in Medellin, in Colombia, to drug trafficking villages in Mexico, to the grasslands of Inner Mongolia and their ever-expanding cities in China, and through rural India. I've been and traveled through 15 countries, 23 journeys. I spent close to 200 days meeting consumers in their homes, sharing their food, sometimes even sleeping on their floor. With that, I became a collector of people's personal stories. And I collected them like I collected data, but where data had told me what was going on, stories explained why. As such, they were much more powerful than any data because they gave me the insight why trends are happening and showed me a path to the future. I use a tool that no machine can replicate: empathy. It allows us to understand other people well enough to feel what they're feeling. It works well when we understand their values and what matters to them. And then we can invest in solutions that truly meet their needs.
You look at trends in emerging markets, and many assume that emerging markets are just going to follow where the Western world leads, but that's not always the case, is it?
One of the most common questions I get asked, Mike, is why even bother doing all this work on the ground in emerging markets when these people would just follow the trends that we are setting in the developed world? And in behavioral finance, this is called projection bias. People believe that other people will consume what you're consuming today. And that was possibly true maybe 40 years ago, but definitely has not been true in emerging markets for the last 20 years. If I look back at my life when I was growing up in Cyprus as a kid 40 years ago, I remember when the teacher came one day, and I was probably either 10 or 12, and she asked the question of, what do you want to be when you grow up? And all the kids in the class started, and one guy wanted to be a policeman, the other one wanted to be in the army, and one wanted to be an astronaut. And my turn came, and I said, I want to be American. And the teacher tried to explain to me that being American is not a profession, it's actually a nationality. But I would have nothing of it. I insisted I wanted to be American. And I was watching all this TV, and there were all these great things in their lives. There was a series, I don't know if you remember it, in the late 70s called 8 is Enough. And there was this little boy called Nicholas who had this perfect haircut. I wanted his life. He played with his brothers, on grass, football. And in Cyprus, it was all like dirt and stones. I kind of, living through the 80s and the 90s, always felt inferior. The developed world was ahead of us. But I think that has changed, and maybe it exists with older generations in emerging markets. I can think of a situation. We were in Peru, and we were asking a question, what does it mean to be Peruvian? And I remember I asked this old lady, and she said to me, Peruvian is about flavor. She said, these foreigners can make drugs and pharmaceuticals, but when it comes to cooking and flavor, this is what the Peruvians know how to make. Basically saying, we're not good enough to make anything that can kill you, because we will kill you if we make pharmaceuticals. But on the same trip, we went to this village, and we always dressed down so we feel like we would fit with the local people. And we showed up at this Peruvian village, and we were the worst dressed people in the village. All these kids knew how to dress, they knew how to do their makeup from YouTube, they knew how to dye their hair. So what we've seen with the democratization of information is that people are no longer feeling they're left behind. I think in the early 2000s, in India, one of the TV channels ran an advert for Friends. Miss it here, catch it in the US later, because they are hours ahead. So they watch all the Netflix programs even before us these days. And so what we've seen is that with cheap phones and cheap data, you can get a geophone in India for £15, and you can get a data plan for 50p. Now, people are accessing more and more information that doesn't make them feel behind. And what we've seen was the first 300 million, let's say, Indians who joined the internet, but now the people in the villages, there is local content. They are having also access to all this information. And that is changing the trends that are evolving. There is no longer the media imperialism that was driven by the developed world, that we projected our culture onto those people and they were going to follow it. Now they're not only going to set their own trends, but potentially they could be setting trends for us to follow.
Tassos, thank you so much for your time and for your views. And for those of you listening, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast series, where I'm going to be talking further to Tassos about his insights into emerging markets and his trips.